So moving on, we're going to start applying some textures and manipulating those on our actual set here. So I think I'll start with the walls because, why not? Really, you can start wherever you want. That's fine. So the first step is to select the walls and make a new layer. So I'm going to go find, so I've got stage right wall face, stage right wall top. So I'm going to start with the stage right wall face. I'm going to just do that every single time, aren't I? Go back to here, turn that back off, go back to my layers, hit Q a couple of times, and we're back. All right, so I've got my layer here selected, and I'm going to make a new layer and call this wall. Let's call it stage right wall so I don't get them confused. Face. And for right now, I'm just going to fill them with a color just so I have a base. I'm probably going to use that stone texture I showed a while ago. So we'll just start with kind of a gray fill for right now. Suppose this would be a good opportunity to tell you, you can actually save these colors and name them in your swatches here. If you go to your color picker and then add to swatches, you can name this wall base gray, whatever you like to. And that's going to show up in your libraries, first of all. It will also show up in your colors here. So when you're looking at that, you can, if you know it's a color you might leave for a while and want to come back to and have that exact same color, it's going to save it in some different places. If that palette was a little bit bigger, you'd be able to see the library a little bit better. But just, keep that in mind. If you ever think you're going to reuse those, then it is a good idea to save them. So I've got my base color, and I opened up this image here. So I'm going to apply this texture onto that wall. Now, a nice thing about this particular texture is that it's repeatable. So if you'll notice on the edge of the, if you look at the edge on the left side here and then compare that to the edge on the right side, it's going to line up if you put them next to each other. Not all textures are designed this way. This one I just happened to get lucky with on the internet. I don't own that image, just am borrowing it for this project. So first step I'm going to do is just simply import that image into my file. So I'm going to pull it out of my hierarchy here, choose my move tool, click on that and bring it over, and hopefully it's there. Now before I do anything else, I actually needed to deselect this layer for a second so that I can move it around. If I had that selection still on and I tried to move this around, it would not work because it would only affect the selection there. All right, so first thing I notice is that this is too big, so I need to scale down the image. So I'm going to apply just a free transform to this for right now, so I can scale it down, get it to something that looks a little bit more appropriate for the size wall we're talking about here. And once I'm happy with that, then hit return to set that scale. And now I'm going to select it just because I don't, well, okay, I'm not going to select it. Show you what's going to happen. So obviously it doesn't fit the whole wall now, doesn't cover the whole thing, so I need to make a copy of this. So if I just use my move tool, it just moves the shape around, right? I want to make a copy of it and fill that in. So if I hold down my Option key on my Mac or Alt key on the PC, it changes to that double arrow, and you can drag that down, line it up, and let go, and you can see how it has created a separate layer. That may or may not be a good thing. You can, from this point, merge these two layers together, and you will be good to go. You're back to one layer. but I don't really want 2 layers there. So I'm going to go back just to show you what happens. If I have this selected rather than actually just moving it, and I do want to make sure I do not have anything else selected on there. So I'm going to go outside of this, use the magic wand tool, hold down the Option key or the Alt key, and so it has just selected the outside or the perimeter of that stone. And now when I go to my Move tool, again, hold down that Option key, slide it down, line it up. It's about right. So now it has just made that selection doubled and it is still on the same layer. So 2 different ways to do it. If it's selected, it will not create a new layer. If it is not selected, it is thinking you're making a copy of that. But see how nicely that lines up? You can't even hardly see where the seam is. Maybe a little bit, but not too bad. All right, so from here then, because of our perspective in this, these walls, this edge of the wall is closer to the audience, this is farther away. So there is some perspective going on here that we got to deal with. So the first thing I want to do, since these are on the same layer, is I do want this time, I'm going to, nothing selected, I'm going to create a new layer and just bring this over to here, just so I have a copy of that. Maybe slide it over so I get a slightly different pattern on there. And that'll be good to go. So I've got these 2, and I'm going to eventually need to rename those, but for right now, this is what we've got. So I've got layer 1, this one. So this is where I'm going to use that the transform tool and use the perspective setting again, because right now this stone wall is basically facing front. We want it to appear to be receding to the background. So if I use my transform and perspective mode, I should be able to slide this down. Now you got to be a little bit careful. Think about where your horizon line is. Does it make sense for the bottom and the top to come squished together equally? In this case, my horizon line is probably somewhere in this vicinity. Let's back it up and kind of have a look. So I'm guessing, since I can see the top of this platform here, but I can't see the top of this particular wall, then it is probably somewhere in here. So somewhere along that line, those stones should be kind of straight across. And then the stones on the bottom will recede up, the stones towards the top will recede down. And I'm not going to go too crazy. I don't want it to, you know, it's not a real significant perspective, but it is there nonetheless. So we'll try that for right now. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this layer copy. Now remember, even though this is slanting back this way, the wall itself is still sloping to the back. So the pattern itself needs to get smaller along this edge and stay wider here. And I could even bring that edge up a little bit if I need to. Notice I'm not worried about being outside of the lines at this point. We're going to fix that in just a moment. Right now I just want to get the basic shape and lineup of these stones to make sense for the image. Okay, so now that I have that, I can go back to this stage right wall face that I did a fill on. Hold on down Command, click on that, and it has made that selection. If I invert that selection now, so go to Select, Inverse, or learn the shortcut, Shift, Command, Inverse. And so now everything outside of that shape is selected. I can simply hit Delete, maybe. Oh, I'm on the wrong layer. This is where you got to pay attention to the layers. So go to layer 1, hit delete, there it goes. Layer 1 copy, hit delete, there it goes. And you are left with those faces of stone wall. We're going to do the same idea, but on the face and on the top here. Now just keep in mind it's a slightly different perspective, so it's going to go in a different way. This edge to our view would be considered closest to us. This is farther away. Now it's thin, so it's not going to be a real dramatic change, but you will want to make that slightly smaller on that side as you fill that in. I've already applied the top facing here, and essentially I just made a copy of the wall texture, and then I ended up using the distort transform tool. I tried skew, it didn't work. Distort kind of gave me a semblance of that. So, you know, it doesn't line up perfectly, but I think visually speaking, it's going to work. So now I'm working on the stage right wall side. I've already renamed my layers here, and I've got this. Again, it was what I used originally for the facing of this. So a couple of things I want to do is I kind of want to see what happens if I can manage to get this side to line up right here. I don't know if I'm going to like the way it looks, but I'm going to show you how to do that real fast too. So I've got that selected. I'm going to go to transform, and then I'm just going to flip it in the horizontal way. And so I can go in, lay this down with that edge there, line it up, and I'm kind of hoping that this will make it look like that stone is wrapping the corner, since ideally, you know, that's what would happen. It's a little odd that it's just kind of a perfect mirror image of it, but once we apply some other textures and things to it, I think it will be okay. So once I've got that, then I'm just going to go again to transform in the perspective, maybe just make that a little bit more severe, not too much, because again, it's just going back the other way. Like this is your typical 2-point perspective. One side facing goes and vanishes off over here, and then this side goes and vanishes off over here. So visually speaking, that looks like it'll probably be pretty close. Hit enter, and again, I just need to go and make that selection. So that's my stage right wall side, this one. Hold down my command key to make that selection, go back over here. That's still the active layer, and I can do an inverse selection to select everything except that, so you can see the little marching ants, and hit delete, and that will get rid of it. Now the only thing that we don't have right now on these two faces are that gray underlayer. Probably not that big of a deal at this point. Depending on how we approach dealing with the blending modes of these, it would make a difference. But if we're just going to use this texture as is, or at least generally as is, then we're not going to need that underlayer there. So I'm going to go to this other side and attempt to do the same basic idea. This time I'm going to work, I'll speed up the video, and you can see how it all goes. Alright, so I've completed the walls now. I decided not to line this one up just right. I thought it looks a little, again, a little odd being perfectly mirrored on there. But again, once we do some colorizing and changing the flatness of this, I think it will end up working out okay. Alright, so my next section, I think, is going to be these columns here. And for these, let's see if I have any interesting textures in here that I want to work with. That looks pretty good. Let's use this one. So I'm going to go through the same basic process with this as I did with the stone walls. This one may not line up perfectly. I don't know if this is going to have the same pattern or not, like if I had to change up the overall edge of that. So we'll see what happens. I may end up needing to like do a selection and feather the edge and go from there. So so first of all, looking at that, I think the texture is probably too big again, so I'm going to scale that down. Something that looks a little bit more appropriate. And there may be times where you want to, you know, exaggerate things, whatever, and that's all fine and good. So first, that looks like a pretty good scale, so I'm going to hit enter for that. I think I'm going to rotate this so that it is more up and down. So I'm just going to rotate 90 degrees. And when I imported that, notice it put it on its own layer. So I'm working on this layer that only has this square of probably concrete of some sort. So I'm going to see what happens if I just make a copy. And I'm going to go ahead and let it make a new layer so I can make adjustments easier. And it's not exactly right, so bring that back down. All right, so as you can see, there's a definite line going across here that I just don't really like. It looks a little bit too tiled. So there's two different things I might do. Let's start with the first one. That might be the easiest thing to do, is to merge these two layers together so it's one single layer again. And just right click, hit merge layer, and we have our single layer. At this point, I could go to my clone stamp tool, and I might be able to just sort of brush over this very easily with the clone stamp and make it disappear. So that's one choice. Let's try it. So I'm going to actually make my brush a little bit bigger, so I have a little bit more space to work with. The smaller the brush, the more fine detail you can get, but we just kind of want to fill that in. And this brush has soft edges, that's good. And I'm going to just cut the opacity and the flow down just a little bit. So I don't want it to become super obvious. So if I hit my Option key or my Alt key to set that tool, so you see how it kind of turns into a crosshairs, that becomes your source for the information. So I'm just going to go kind of close to that edge so it doesn't, you know, does not do too different there. And I should be able to just kind of, oops, see, I landed on a line there, which really doesn't matter because that part's going to end up getting cut away. And you can change up your source a little bit. So if I come down here and click that, again, it's just going to help to soften that edge. So this is one way to do it. And if I back out, it's a little bit fuzzy along there. It looks a little funky. You know, that would probably be okay. So I'm going to go back where it wasn't like that before and still merged. And I want to show you one more tool that is really cool that I think maybe you'll like. So where that seam is, I'm going to make a selection kind of over the top of that. So this is another tool. This is the patch tool. And there's some other ones in here that you can kind of play around with. But I like this one because I can make a selection where that is, has a problem, has that line going across. You make the selection and you kind of just drag it into another part of the image, let go, and then when you deselect, it is much more faded on there. This is a great tool for if you have portraits and you have bags under your eyes. works really great. Select that bag under your eye, drag it to your forehead or something like that, and it gets rid of circles under your eyes. So for those who want to fix your photographs. Anyways, so now that's there. That's a lot less obvious. I could probably spend a little bit more time on that to make it a little bit better. But for now, I think I'm going to be okay with this. So at this point, all I really need to do is go in and make that selection, delete the area that I don't need anymore, and I'll be good to go. So first, before I do all that, I'm just going to go ahead, since all of these columns are going to have the same basic texture, I'm just going to go in and make copies of this. So Command J, Command J. So this is going to be my column 1. This will end up being column 2. And again, just double click on the text there and it will bring up those things. So back to column 1, turn those off first. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to select this, slide it over. I'm trying to make sure it's in a little bit different position so it's not the same exact texture. And then same thing for here, column 3, drag that over. I'm going to have to widen that one a little bit. I'm going to make copies of these 3 layers, and I just have them all selected. I can right click and duplicate layers this way as well, and it should just say copies. So this way I'll be able to keep the right side and the left side separate. So once again, I'm going to column 1, delete, column 2, delete, column 3, delete, and I'm just going to trust that that worked because I've got those duplicates on here. Now I just need to go and do my stage left side, go to my copies, reverse my selection, and delete, column 2, delete, column 3, delete, and then deselect. And now I have my columns there.